Happy Thursday. How's it going, everybody?
It's going well, 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 going
Whoa,
well,
you
going
just
well,
like,
going well, 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 going well,
what's
going well,
going here,
going well,
Matt?
going well,
You got a
going well,
Max
going
Headroom
well,
thing
going
going
well,
on.
going
We
well, going well,
let's
going
mute
well,
him.
going well, going well, going well, going well, going well,
Anyway,
This is a music show, right? Like we have keyboards
it
and
is.
we got the
It is. I'm gonna remove Matt from the stage real quick.
EDM thing going on.
Yeah, we do here. So Matt Housley, decides to fix his audio setting. We'll let him back in. Let me see if it's fixed. Nope. Okay, still there. Anyway, Matt, good to see you again. We're here to talk about the 2024 Mad Landscape special show. So he finally released it this week. Tell us about it. What's new? What's happening in the data landscape?
Yeah, finally released it next week, and that was supposed to be a kind of like end of January kind of a target, but as it turns out, like putting all these little logos together and writing the post is a little bit of a time-consuming exercise. Even with the great help of my colleague Aman Kabir, who hopefully is listening to this as well. It's it's a time-consuming exercise, but as I like to say, from our perspective, the input is almost what matters most, right? It's sort of the exercise of putting the things together. Every year has the forcing function of forcing us to sit down and do the work. And just, for a few weeks, and typically that's nights and weekends, just spending time reading all the posts, listening to all the podcasts, watching all the YouTube videos and all the things. So doing the prep work. And that is incredibly formative and informative, and so that's a big part of the idea, right? Sort of the input, and then the output is it's all gravy from there. That's the general idea.
I mean, how much time does it take to research this Mad Landscape?
Weeks, months. Like I don't really know. To some extent, it's like an ongoing effort. It's part of the idea that because like we know it's coming at some point, right? Like every year, then there's a little bit of ongoing work throughout. But then as we get closer, there's like a solid 2 to 3 months just of research, and then the effort to just put the thing together is just weeks and months as well.
Dang.
But again, I don't want to make it sound like we're complaining because it's all self-imposed. But again, it's like I don't want to, maybe it's like a cheap analogy, but like the way I think about it is like a little bit like going to the gym, right? It's like a workout. If you're going to be an investor in the space, you need to know what's going on, and doing this publicly as a forcing function of just forcing us to go to the gym, I guess.
Right. Well, you've been going to the gym for what is it, 14 years now? I think you did. You said this is a 10th one though, right? So you started in
it's a 10th
2012.
one. Yeah, so I started in 2012, and interestingly, at the very first one I did this with my colleague at the time, Shivan Zilis, who I was with at Bloomberg Ventures, and then went on to actually being on the board of OpenAI for a bit while they were mostly a nonprofit, and now, as far as I know, has been working at Neuralink. But that was Shivan and I did that first version back in 2012, and then I mostly kept doing it and skipped a couple of years. So yes, it's the 10th anniversary, but it's sort of we've been doing it for the last 12 years.
Awesome, congrats. And Matt Housley's back. Let me see if his audio works again.
Yeah, how's this, Joe? Can you hear me?
Better, yes. Thank you.
Not sure what
Nice.
happened, but it just stopped hearing you guys. Okay.
Yeah, Matt and I are going to actually just start making some beats. So
that's right. What's old is new again. Yeah.
Thanks for sparing the world from that.
Just so we between the keyboards in the back and like Matt rapping, I think we got something going on here.
No, Joe can rap.
Something very special.
Yeah.
It would have been pretty cool. So yeah, it's good to see the Matts here. So Matt Housley, we're just catching up on sort of the kind of the context of this whole thing, the Mad Landscape, and just the work that goes into it. So and then 2024, I guess this is okay. So I think the past few years, at least from my perspective, it feels like it was really hard to keep up with the data and machine learning landscape, especially ever since like 2021 or something like that, 2020, when you just had the explosion of data tools. But now you have AI in the mix. And I have no idea how you're able to keep up with the amount of stuff happening in AI right now. Like, maybe walk us through that. How do you do
Well,
this?
yeah, I think that's the same struggle for all of us. Like, I wish I could say there's like some kind of AI behind the scenes to power like the whole research. Actually, I did try. It was a one more opportunity to use all the tools like from ChatGPT to Perplexity to all the things, especially for the writing part. And as it turns out, we're still not quite there. Like, even in terms of like producing a good first draft, that was not.
Interesting.
That was not that helpful. I did try. U.com has released as part of the Genius product. They have this capability where you take a YouTube link and you feed it in, and then it spits out a summary of the video. So I used that a bit. I thought that was very good.
Cool.
I actually don't know if other products have that. Maybe they do, but like I'm only familiar with the U.com version of this. So I thought that was pretty cool. But yeah, other than that, like I was saying a minute ago, it's the forcing function of just, okay, well, I'm going to have to do the thing. Therefore, read all the posts and all the newsletters and all the things, as opposed to having 10 AI newsletters in my inbox every morning and saying, one day I'll read those. So, if I know I'm going to do this mad thing, then I'll read it. But yeah, like, as you were saying, like this data infrastructure and AI, and that's something I mentioned in the post, but that's very much a core principle of this whole MAT exercise, which is that in a way, it's not one market map, it's several market maps combined together. So there's one for data infrastructure, there's one for analytics, there's one for machine learning and AI, and there's one largely for AI-driven applications. So in some ways, it's 4 market maps built into one. And the whole principle of the MAT landscape, and the reason why we kept everything on one map, is because, as you guys know, right, and perhaps some people listening to this know as well, it's all a continuum. It's all, you need to extract the data, process the data, transform the data, clean up the data, like all those things, to then fit it either in analytics for BI purposes or into machine learning and AI to create predictive analytics kind of a product. And all the AI-driven products can only work if they operate on top of an AI or data stack. So if you look at the MAT landscape from left to right, it's sort of that continuum. And every year as we add more logos, there's more pressure to try and break the different parts of the landscape into one. But like the whole editorial decision, if you wish, is to keep everything on one, even if we probably past the point where it's sort of uncomfortably large. But that's a very clear editorial decision.
Let me just share the screen real quick here. So this is the 2024 MAD Machine Learning Artificial Intelligence Data Landscape, and
yes.
Yeah.
And you've seen the interactive version as well?
There's the interactive version.
Yeah.
Yeah.
At mad.firstmark.com, like we have a interactive version of this that people can play with, which has a search. At some point in our lives, we'll probably add filters to it as well.
So we started infrastructure here. And this is, as far as I remember, this is kind of where it all started. It was more of the tooling stuff way back in the 2012 one.
It was like the
because it was
big data hype cycle, right? Yeah.
Yes, exactly. It was the whole big data thing. I mean, we did have like the structure of it has not changed that much. So we did have applications, as far as I remember, on the right side. But yeah, fundamentally, it was that was the wave at the time, right? It was like big data. This idea that you could digitize data and or have massive amounts of digitized data that you could store in one place, in Hadoop in particular, and that was the genesis of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so walk us through this. Like, what's changed from the 2023 to 2024 edition?
So interestingly, if you look at the left, not that much in infrastructure. So it's a little bit to the comment about this being several market maps into one. Different parts of the market map have different market maps, sub-market maps, if you want, have had pretty different fortunes in the last sort of like 12 to 18 months. And the stuff on the left, that's really, mostly what came out of that big wave of data infrastructure that precisely started with big data and Hadoop, and arguably sort of ended with the modern data stack. And as you guys recall, in 20, whenever that was, 18, 19, 20, 21,
Mm-hmm.
that was the thing that we're extremely excited about. And, that plus, ZERP kind of madness led to massive amounts of investment and company creation in that space. And then the Snowflake IPO was like the sort of the peak of it all, because as we know, that was the biggest software IPO ever. And then that sort of like unleashed even more craziness into that part of the world in data infrastructure. And as a result, you have a bunch of categories like EL, TL on the sort of bottom left, or data quality, orchestration, data catalogs, like this whole thing that got super, super hot, and therefore super, super crowded in, again, like 2018, 19, 20, 21. And now we sort of like we've kind of pressed pause, right? Like the action moved on to the right side of the landscape towards machine learning and AI. So as a result, on the left side, data infrastructure, there hasn't been tons that's super new. That you still have those categories. You still have like obviously the data warehouses and the lake houses, and then like all of this has not changed much. The two things in data infrastructure that have changed are on the second row on the right side, actually. So you have this concept of multimodal databases and database abstraction, which we have one investment in a company called SurrealDB. And there, the thesis is very much that we're going from a phase of unbundling of databases to rebundling. So the unbundling is really that whole wave of the last 10 years where, you started with basically Oracle, and then you ended up with time series database and document databases and NewSQL databases and graph databases. That's, from Mongo to Neo4j, to all the time series databases. You had like this explosion of databases, and it feels to us like there's a phase of rebundling where ultimately developers are looking for sort of like one database or one data infrastructure that can do it all. And maybe for 10 or 20% of use cases, you'll still want something super, super precise. But for the most part, people will love the idea of having one kind of database that they can work with to go from startup project kind of thing to a pretty big scale. So that's that concept of multimodal databases and database abstraction that's on that second row. So that's one part of data infrastructure that's changed. Another part of data infrastructure that has changed and seen quite a bit of heat is vector databases, which you have here. So, that's super interesting because that's part of that emerging AI stack. Like, not to say anything that you guys don't already know that people may know, but like a vector database is that whole concept of, you take unstructured data and effectively to be able to feed it into the large language models, you need to transform it into a format that large language models can understand, and you need to store it, somewhere as part of that process, and that's vector databases. And that's part of this whole like emerging architecture around how you ensure that large language models are fed with your data, one, and two, have a lower chance of hallucinating. That's called RAG, for retrieval augmented generation. So so those two parts have changed. The rest in data infrastructure, not that much.
Well, let me ask you this: with it seems like there's dedicated vector databases like the Pinecones, the Weaviates, and so forth. But then it also seems like a lot of other databases are tacking on vector functionality
or claiming it, right? Like
claiming
Redis is
it,
claiming now to be a vector database, but
But how do you, how do you make the distinction between what to include in these categories? Is there a clean delineation? Like if they're only focused on this particular task, this is how they get lumped into say vector databases? How do you do that?
Yeah, I mean, that's like one of the real difficulties of the exercise, and I don't know that we have a perfect way of doing it, but like largely, we try to to put one company per box effectively, except for the hyperscalers. And then for the hyperscalers, we'll put the specific product that they have. So the specific AWS or Azure product that fits in that category. For everybody else, especially all the startups, we try really hard to just keep it to one place. But yeah, you could argue, to Matt's point, MongoDB in particular made the announcements around also being a vector database, but we're not going to put MongoDB, even though that's a very large company, into like both NoSQL and vector databases. Otherwise, we'll never, see the end of it. Like we already have 2011 logos on this. We gotta make a cut somewhere. But yeah, but that on the substance of it, that's a really interesting question whether vector databases are here to stay in a context where you have more competition from the more the typical database players. So that's one question. And the second question, which also has a lot of debate, as you guys know, is whether the extension of the context windows will effectively obviate the need for vector databases altogether. If you can put like all the data that you need into the model, why do you need to store it in that kind of like intermediate layer? And there's strong arguments on both sides, but it's a really interesting space to watch.
Let me
plus they all like raise a bunch of money and grew very, very fast in the last year. So it's it's a competitive box for sure.
Yeah, that makes sense. I want to kind of take a higher view for a second. So obviously you've been doing this since 2012, and we've talked a bit about the history. And AI is obviously very exciting technology. It's also clearly a hype cycle, like a lot of hype cycles. It could be a very meaningful, sticky hype cycle. I'm in that camp. Some people argue that maybe it's a more temporary hype cycle. But from your perspective, how does this cycle vary from past cycles, like the big data cycle or the modern data stack, or you have data science, ML, you have a bunch of these big cycles happening that kind of show up in the mad landscape over time. What's your perception of the differences and the similarities with the past?
So I think so. The overarching comment is that it's all part of the same megatrend. So not to be flippant about it, but that's from my perspective largely the same thing, which is this idea of that the whole world is getting digitized, and then to basically do something with it. With all that data, which is analyzing it, understanding it, and then predicting, coming up with predictions about where the world might be going. And that's what I've been doing at FirstMark, like this whole time for the last 10 plus years at FirstMark. That's been my entire thesis. So from my perspective, and that's why I personally find this data landscape, this mad landscape, to be very helpful to me. Again, that goes back to the comment about the input. Is that like I just see the heat moving left and right and left, up and down, kind of thing, but it's still the same thing, right? And so that's the overarching comment. Now, I find this moment to be particularly exciting, and as I put in the write-up at the beginning, I think that's actually probably the most exciting moment of like this entire time that I've spent in this space, and that's because it sort of feels like hype cycle after the other, wave of investment and company formation after the other. We're sort of at a point where it all lines up. And all the pieces are there, where the data infrastructure is in place for the most part, and now the machine learning and AI part is in place as well, and it all sort of like works together in a way that make a lot of things possible that just were not possible. So you basically couldn't have machine learning and AI today the way it is today if you didn't have those prior waves of big data, modern data stack, kind of thing, ETL tools, and governance, and all the things. So that's the sort of the second comment. Like I think this hype cycle is special and super interesting, and the direct result of like everything that happened in the past. Now at a tactical level, sort of not what it means for the next 5 to 10 years, but what it means for 2024. there is indeed a little bit of deja vu for some of this stuff, which does make me a little nervous, again, for the short term, not the long term or even the medium term. But I've been resistant to use the term modern AI stack because it sounds so much like modern data stack.
Never say modern. Never say modern.
Yes, exactly. or stack. But we had so much noise. In some ways, it's a little bit of a hangover from the whole modern data stack thing. So like why reproduce immediately the same kind of like marketing hype for the next stack? So I've been resistant to use the term, but like in many ways, it's sort of the same thing, right? Like the action has moved to different part of the stacks, and the modern data stack was largely about structured data. You use a 5 or AirByte to extract data from SAS tools or databases. You move it into Snowflake, which is largely a big structured database. Even to caricature, even though there's been a lot of evolution. And then you largely fit it into BI tools. Whereas in the modern data stack, in the modern AI stack, you take a lot of unstructured data, and then you move it through those new tools, including vector databases, and then you fit it into machine learning and AI models. So it's some of the same idea. It feels like some of the less than ideal things that were happening in the modern data stack are also starting to happen in the modern AI stack, which is like there's a bunch of companies that pop up out of nowhere, and there's a lot of VC money going into those companies, and at valuations that are largely ahead of where they are as companies from a revenue perspective. So there's a little bit of that cycle, which will lead it to overcrowding, and then to some of the questions that we all grapple with around consolidation and what happens to like all those companies that never really reached escape velocity, and how many tools can the market sustain.
Yeah, it definitely feels that way. And I guess so if we kind of look on the what is it, I guess I'll call this sort of the modern data stack part of the the landscape here, the infrastructure analytics part here. How much activity are you seeing in terms of companies from that era rebranding themselves as AI companies? I think you even made a call out in your article, in your write up here, where it was hard to identify like who was actually an AI
who am I
company.
subtweeting?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Kind of like the Spider-Man. Everyone, every Spider-Man's pointing at each other. Because everyone's an AI company. Like, walk us through that. Like, if we look at this machine learning AI part here, but then I kind of zoom out and look at every company. Like I joked on your comment on LinkedIn, you think you need the James Webb telescope to see everything here. It seems like every company that I've seen wants to be an AI company all of a sudden. How do you distinguish between what goes into the quote ML and AI bucket and what isn't?
Yeah. So look, I think startups that are rebranding into AI. So to be more specific, data infrastructure companies, startups that rebrand into AI startups are doing the right thing for the most part, right? I mean, it's been a tough year and a half or a couple of years in the world of data infrastructure, as we just discussed. So you're a startup, like you're a founder, or CEO, or a team. You wanna grow. You wanna at a minimum survive. And if you find yourself in a market where you were super hot, and all of a sudden like everybody think that you were yesterday's great story. You got to react, and that's what made great entrepreneurs. You gotta fight back. And so I have a lot of empathy for companies that do that, that want to rebrand from a marketing standpoint. I do think that there is a real business opportunity to do that as well. There's a lot of demand for AI infrastructure technology. So if you have a product that lends itself to doing that, then I think that's a great idea. Now, where things are a little tougher is when companies are fundamentally sort of structured data infrastructure companies that really are part of the modern data stack and don't lend themselves very well to be part of the AI stack because it's just a different kind of product, a different kind of technology, but still position themselves as AI company. So in other words, a little bit of a like marketing smoke and mirrors. That's a little tougher. But for all the other ones that have a legitimate claim to evolve into being part of the AI stack, I think that's a good idea. And yes, it's dizzying because everybody's website is changing, but that feels like the right thing to do. So that's infrastructure. And then to answer your question completely, on the application side, then yes, like everybody is an AI company, right? All of a sudden.
Oh my God, I can't even. I need to zoom in so much to read these. It's like the logos got smaller on the application side.
Yeah, it should be like it probably doesn't show on LinkedIn very well, but it's very high res, right? So you can really zoom in to a single logo on a PDF, and it should help. And again, the interactive version at map.firstmark.com.
I got my driver's license renewed a few weeks ago. I think this should just be the eyesight test for the
for anyone in tech, basically.
Well, that would be a great distribution.
The hilarious thing too is the web image version. You can't. It's just blurry. Like you try to zoom in and you can't see the logos. You have to get the PDF or the interactive version to actually see anything.
But I think it speaks to the fact that there's a lot of companies in this in the application part too. Like, walk us through this. I mean, so Matt Housley and I, we tend to be more of the infrastructure and the ML and AI area, and the applications were sort of I would say it's our blind spot, Matt. So how do you so we had the comment about AI and all these applications. Maybe start with that. Like, walk us through how you this whole applications landscape with
So the one that's the most pure play in all of this would be that applications dash horizontal box, which is largely all the generative AI companies. So there's a lot of young startups in there. Plus, some companies like Adobe or Canva that moved very quickly to add, or Notion, to add AI capabilities to their product. But for the most part, there's a bunch of generative AI startups. And those are the pure play. Like, there's a lot of companies that run on top of OpenAI or some other LLM providers. And then there's a bunch of companies that are much more full stack and doing some of their work themselves, or all their work themselves. And those are pretty much the generative AI applications right now. So the left side is super interesting, right? The world of code, which has been one very clear use case for generative AI. So you have a lot of those companies, and then like all the cool stuff around text, audio, voice, image, like anything that can be generated. I've interviewed a bunch of those companies on my podcast or events. We have some companies in our portfolio as well, like Synthesia, which is an AI video company that creates avatars and all the things. Very impressive company, growing very fast. Like a good number of those companies in application and horizontal. So that's the pure play part, and then the part above that, those are largely the kind of like enterprise specific applications. So you take finance, you take legal, you take sales, you take marketing. A bunch of companies are providing AI driven solutions for that. And then the part below that is industry specific AI companies. So look, that's where it gets very blurry, and I'm not talking about the resolution quality, but what companies actually do. So look, the way we think about it is we spend some time looking at websites, and there's a bunch of companies that we know and have spoken with over the years, and we try our best to sort of parse the companies that actually do AI. You can sort of tell, like, based on the outcome or the product that they actually build, whether that's something that could really only exist or could only really perform with AI. So we'll include by default the companies that feel like real AI native or truly AI enhanced companies, as opposed to companies that just added AI to their website last week.
Well, and I know one of the controversies in investing right now is that a lot of young startups that jumped into the space were just wrappers around OpenAI or some other underlying model. And then you have other companies that really understand the technology and dig into it. So how do you approach that problem as a venture capitalist, say, when you're interviewing founders?
Yeah, that's one of my favorite questions. So there's and I have a bit on the in the write up on that. It's all that question of thin wrappers. So thin wrappers, like the term everybody loved to hate, last year, and very much that idea that okay, like right, so you're growing fast, but like ultimately you're just a little bit of a layer on top of OpenAI. So how do you build differentiation over time? And I have a little bit of a different view, I guess, compared to at least some, which is that I think thin wrappers on the whole just need more time on Earth to grow. Sorry, I'm seeing I'm laughing at my own meme as I see
Oh yeah,
Jean-Claude.
That was pretty damn funny, actually.
It's from our era too. I mean, Joe and I's era.
Yeah, I think Matt, that was good.
And I think with a little bit of more time on Earth, I think thin wrapper companies can evolve into thick wrappers, not to be cute with the terminology, but with more time, companies build more product and more tooling and more layers on top of the LLM engine. And I think that matters a lot, and I think that's differentiating. And if you take AI for customer service, for example, yes, OpenAI will do a lot, but that doesn't mean anything if you're a customer. You need all sorts of things. You need privacy. You need workflow. You need your data to be stored somewhere, and your data to be pulled contextually for this customer or that customer. And all of this is very it's a lot of product to build. So I think a lot of the thin wrapper companies will evolve into building all those different layers. And as they do that, they'll become more defensible. So now, is that like the ultimate mode? I don't know, but I'd argue that those companies will not be any more or less defensible than your typical SaaS company.
Okay, so I'm gonna ask you to predict the future real quick, which is kind of your job, right? But no,
I'm a VC. That's what I do.
Yeah. Okay, so
and I never fail at it.
It's always We're gonna go back and fact check you on every Mad landscape. Yeah. But let's ask this question: like, do you think this cycle is going to be kind of like the .com boom in the '90s, where huge investment cycle, then a collapse, then here we are, right? Like the .com boom was a real thing, but it took us a while to get in gear to understand what the full impact was going to be. So which of those two is more likely, like a kind of trough and then a big boom afterward, or are we going to just keep going and growing in the next several years in the AI space specifically?
Yeah, it's the question, right? Like, are we in an AI bubble of some sort? And it's a tough one because as we all found out in the last couple of years, ultimately technology, for all its power and all the things we love about it, is a sector in a broader macro kind of world. And then something happens to interest rates, and all the darling technology companies that we thought were so hot all of a sudden are not. So there's a lot that can happen from a macro perspective and geopolitical perspective that is particularly hard to predict. Now, for AI specifically, I hate to sound like everybody else, but like I do, it's a paradigm shift. I just don't think it's a paradigm shift that just happened, since November 2022. I think it's, at least 10, 15 years in the making, as per the above. But I do think it's a fundamental paradigm shift, and I do think that is going to increasingly and perhaps exponentially add to the overall economy. whether that's productivity, just like sheer value creation. So 5 to 10 year kind of like horizon. What happens this year, next year, or the year after is hard to predict. So in other words, like I don't think that anything that's happening right now is irrational. I think it's actually very rational, because the paradigm shift is real and it's accelerating. Whether the intersection of this plus interest rates and stock market or whatever leads us to some kind of trough, I don't know. I would just offer the very obvious thought that when you see Nvidia stock price growing vertically, what goes up must come down to some extent.
Interesting. I got some questions here. Ronald asks, have any of these companies approached
That
you
was a
for
long-winded way of saying I don't know, and I kind of predict the future.
I appreciate it. Yeah,
But
yeah.
hopefully, I moved my hands enough that that answer was buried.
That was a good answer. Well, it's an honest answer, so I like that. Ronald has a question here, and it's something I've been wondering too. Like, what's the feedback or the questions you get as a result of the mad landscape that you come out with? In his case, his question is, have any of these companies approached you for advice as a result of your landscape?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. I mean, sort of like every day, like sort of like like whatever, like 100 yesterday, kind of
Oh,
thing.
wow.
Well, it's sort of when you publish something like I'm cheating with my answer. Like they obviously when you publish something is when you get like massive inbound and like thoughts, and like some of the feedback is it's actually funny. I almost tweeted that, maybe I will tweet, like half of the feedback is like, oh, this is crazy, there are way too many logos, and the other 50% is like, well, no, you need more logos. Like, why don't you have like AI security and AI robotics and AI for agriculture? And most importantly, where is my company? And why is my company not in 27 boxes and, just in one box, that kind of thing, which, like I'm joking, but like, I completely understand where people are coming from.
Mm-hmm.
So I get a lot of that. And then, a big part of the benefit of doing this is that you start a conversation with the ecosystem. As part of the output I was talking about earlier, and then you got plenty of inbound, and look, that's an obvious question of bandwidth, and to some extent, like this is very much part of the job, but like this is not the job for me. So there's only so many time I can allocate to things around sort of like content and podcast and market maps and all the things. But the great benefit is to start a conversation and meet a lot of people and all the things. So I very much welcome it.
Yeah, I mean, I think when we wrote our book, the data engineering book, you were one of the inspirations for it, actually, inadvertently, because it's like, how the hell does...
that was very deliberate.
I mean, we want books to come out of this for sure.
Based on your life, basically.
Yeah.
Yes.
No, but Matt and I, the questions Matt Housley and I would always have is, how the hell do you make any sense out of this? Like, if you're a data engineer and you're trying to choose a tool, for example, where to begin, right? So I think it posed as many questions as it answers for us. In our case, it was just, if this is the landscape today, and I think, in our book, we had the 2020 landscape. So I think you skipped the 2021 or 22, whichever. But anyway, we had one of those. And even at the time, I mean, if you harken back, those are pretty innocent times, actually, in retrospect, compared to the 2,100 logos you have on here now. So
We were so young.
We were so young and
innocent.
so innocent. But in last year, what was it? 1,400 logos.
Yeah.
And I can't remember if we talked about it, but that represented maybe half to a third, or only a third of, or half of the logos that you actually had looked at. Am I not mistaken in that? Or
Yeah, there was something like that. And this year we deliberately opened up the floodgates even more, because to the conversation we were just having, there's a lot of the whole generative AI thing is like, that's a big kind of like newish wave in terms of company creation. So this historically we would have said, okay, well, one of the heuristics we would use would be, we'll only put in companies that have achieved some level of maturity as measured by, okay, the Series B or later kind of thing. But if we did that, then we would basically miss the entire generative AI wave. So this year in particular, we added a lot of very young companies. So we have a lot of seed stage companies that, for like a reason or another, we thought were interesting after reviewing it. I'm sure we missed a bunch, but we tried to put a lot. So to your question, Matt, about like the AI bubble and all the things, it'd be interesting in a year or two, probably a couple of years, to see how many of those very young companies we would still have, because there'll be like a natural culling, I guess, and some of those companies will continue to graduate through at least the VC rounds, and some will not. So it's actually interesting whether 2011 companies is the peak of like this be as many companies as we'll ever get on the map landscape, or whether that will continue.
Walk us through that. I've always been curious about is there a certain turnover of logos that you see on an annual basis?
Yes, and perhaps that's actually a great question. Perhaps we should do a better job at evidencing this. So there's certainly a number of companies that fail, which is the nature of the beast when you talk about startup companies. Those are harder to find because typically people don't come out with like tweets and announcements around that. Sometimes they do, which is always very courageous and impressive, especially when there is a post-mortem that they write. But typically they don't. So, we look around and we just like verify whether they're still around, whether it's still a website, that kind of thing. And then there is the whole acquisition question, which, by the way, hasn't happened much in the last year and a half or two, which is a whole separate topic. So for acquisitions, our heuristic is to keep companies when the acquirer makes it clear that they will continue running the company as an independent brand. And if they say that, we keep them on. If they don't, we just remove them and typically put the acquirer logo in the place of where the startup was.
What do you think? So one of your comments in the document was that we've actually seen relatively little failure in the modern data stack space. We've seen some pretty dramatic failures more broadly in the startup space. I'm thinking of like Hopin and Convoy. Ones that spring to mind are like Fire Sales. What do you think accounts for the fact that has not happened in the data space yet?
I think largely it's because that whole phase of overfunding the modern data stack largely happened in sort of 2020, 2021. So in the grand scheme of things, it's kind of recent-ish funding. And then a lot of companies did exactly the right thing, which was to cut burn aggressively. And as a result of those two things, companies still have some level of runway. But somewhat sadly, because ultimately I'm a huge fan of this ecosystem and big supporter of the ecosystem, I think we are getting finally to that moment that has been long anticipated, where we're going to see more failures, because you can only cut so much to extend runway, and sort of 3 years after those rounds, either you're able to raise a little more from insiders or from some other firm that may see a good opportunity to come in at a lower price, or you just run out of cash if you don't find an acquirer or home for the company. So in other words, it's coming up, I think, unfortunately.
It seems like it is. Yeah.
Joe, we should build the next Informatica and just go acquire all of these companies and like combine them.
Oh, absolutely. That's a really interesting strategy, for sure. So I think a lot of what's going to happen in data infrastructure is exactly a variation of that, which is that the whole modern data stack, as we know, is just basically a bunch of little startups kind of assembling along a value chain to deliver different functionality. I think fast forward a couple of years, I think we're going to end up with something much more consolidated, one platform that kind of does it all. And that will be probably the best solution for most companies, not most customers, not every single customer, but like most of them. And I think that's going to happen either through a lot of acquisitions, or with a lot of product build. And you're going to see the bigger companies in the space just do more functionality, do more things. So whether that's a Databricks or Snowflake, or even pure play vendors. I think DBT Labs have already started expanding to other functionality, around analytics. I'd be curious to see what Fivetran does and how do they expand. Do they? I know they've already made some acquisitions, but do they then cover like the whole like reverse ETL world? Like what happens there? But I think that's the future. And then if you see. If you see Microsoft Fabric as a new entrant, that's also very clearly what they're trying to do, right? Like one platform that does all the things, so that as a customer, you just have one vendor, one contract, and all the benefits of integrated solutions.
Yeah, Matt. Matt Housley, we always joke about everything inevitably becomes Informatica, but I think that's always been the trend. But sort of true in some ways.
Maybe everything becomes Excel now, though. We're going to have like Excel Fabric.
Oh, Jesus.
No, but it's amazing
Something to look forward to.
It's amazing how well Microsoft has done in this cycle. Had you asked me 5 years ago who the top tech companies were going to be in 2024, that was not on my bingo card.
Yeah,
or 10 years ago.
Absolutely. And, as we all know, in AI, it's been just amazing to watch.
Mm-hmm.
Just, Microsoft and Satya just playing 4D chess and like being ahead of the curve. And then just, from OpenAI to then partnering with Mistral to then the whole like Inflection AI thing, which like the investment itself was sort of interesting, right? Like everybody was like rah-rahing about like OpenAI and Microsoft. And then, on the side, there's like this 1.3 billion investment in Inflection. And then like, all that to lead to the non-acquisition that we saw whenever that was a couple of weeks ago. This is just like, you gotta love it. Like for any kind of industry watcher, observer, it's just fascinating.
Yeah, so how do you think about the AI landscape? Like, 'cause I know we talked about the modern data stack as
I like it.
Awesome. Me too.
You're not a doomer. You're not a doomer. You told me this.
So, we have this mental construct of the modern data stack, which we talked about, and then we talked about kind of the modern AI data stack. Is this how you're approaching how you view your investment thesis for AI, or do you have demarcations and different ways of thinking about this space versus the other way that we've done it in the past?
Yeah. So again, like the general construct in my mind is like it all works together. But having said that, it doesn't mean that all parts are created equal or equally interesting. So I'm particularly interested in a couple of things. So one is that kind of like middle layer of whether we call it the modern AI stack or whatever. I think that's interesting. There's a lot of things happening there, from the vector databases to the orchestration tool, the frameworks, the endpoints, the unstructured ETL kind of companies like this whole tooling layer that's emerging. I think that's interesting. And then I like, I'm particularly interested in what I think of as full stack applications. So applications that largely deliver a value that could not be delivered without AI at its core. So truly AI native companies. And then in full stack what makes the application full stack is that the founders and team do work not just at the application layer, but also go into the infra and the models and do specific work there, which requires a specific kind of team. So those are the two areas where I spend most of my time. But that's pretty broad. Let's look at.
I'm curious. I have a question about how you advise startups. So suppose I build a thin wrapper startup and I'm using OpenAI. When do you tell a startup, hey, it's now time to get into the fine-tuning world, that you need to use a different model and start fine-tuning it instead? Obviously, that gets way, way more expensive, but there's a lot of capability that you can get out of that.
Yeah, I think people, or and maybe have a sort of privileged view of the world because by virtue of what I do, I see a lot of like top startups. I guess I don't need to convince anyone. I think people are pretty, like, founders are just really smart in general, and they understand that it's one thing to hustle and be smart and like, okay, what can I build on top of OpenAI so I can build a brand visibility, all those things. But like I think people get it that very quickly you start getting into like, okay, well, I wish I could do this or I could do that, and then my customers or users are telling me this or that, and then the logical conclusion from that is like, okay, like I need to go into the infra layer, and then that leads to the, okay, do I have the people that know how to do this? And so I think that's part of this whole very natural evolution from thin wrappers to thick wrappers.
Let's ask a question there, Housley.
Well, I'm asking for my startup, basically my Informatica AI startup.
Oh, Jesus.
I think that's a really good idea. It's like kind of like a roll up kind of play. Like I'd be curious, and maybe that's something I should have added to the write up. Like at the end of the write up, this whole thing about like acquisitions and take privates and all the things, and we talk a little bit about the private equity firms in the space doing some deals. But I'd be curious if like any. One of those firms like the Thoma Bravos or Vistas are thinking of like bundling, taking all modern AI, modern data stack companies, and so like bundling a bunch of solutions into one platform, which would be from a tech perspective, the level of effort to integrate everything would probably be pretty high. But I think that's sort of interesting.
Well, and the funny thing is, it's been a long time since I read the article, but the beginning of IBM was something along these lines, where basically an investor took two different companies, combined them, and then they became this huge juggernaut. And partially that was timing, but partially it was this initial move. So who knows?
This is very interesting. Actually, don't know that. Like, I don't know the history of. Is there a book about it?
There was a. Let me try to dig up the blog post. It was probably 2 years ago that I read it, so I'll try to find that and send it to you. Maybe we can tweet it or something.
Speaking of tweets, some friends are asking, do you write your own tweets? You're known as the kind of the meme lord of Twitter, but
yeah, it's funny how much I get the question. I don't know what that means about the VCs or the perception of VC, that like it's like people just like somehow cannot accept the idea that a VC could be just writing stupid tweets. It's sort of amazing. So yes, I very much do, and like it's my kind of like creative kind of little thing on the side, which is largely requires just zero effort, and which I do largely for entertainment. Myself, which I largely started during COVID. And it's funny that like this thing, which is really kind of like brain dead activity for me, if that's a word, which like is really something I don't think about, ends up being something I end up like talking about quite a bit. So it's great. I love it, and it creates interesting conversations. I met plenty of interesting people through Twitter and all the things. But I'm surprised like how often I get that question, because it's like those are really kind of like dumb little comments, right? Like there's no, there's nothing to them really.
Like your Jean-Claude one, for example, right? That was
but
it's funny as hell though. But it's like,
yeah, but it's like it's not a hard joke to come up with, right? Like it's like, do you need a writer to like write some of the Well,
that's what that's what I asked my friends, like, what do you think? He has like a committee and like a whole team that just comes up with tweets. I mean, a lot of this stuff.
Most of my tweets, I don't know, a minute before I tweet them that I'm going to tweet them.
Those are the best ones, though.
Yeah, but it's like I said, like it's my little kind of like creative pursuit on the side. Like we're gonna get into stuff that's gonna sound like bragging or like self-aggrandizing or like any of the things, but like I was always been a jolly creative person and a little bit of a writer. There's a reason why I write those long form things. Like most people hate writing. I actually love writing, even if it's painful. So Twitter for me is that like you give 280 characters to somebody who likes to write. I'm gonna write.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I think more than being like self-congratulating, you're probably one of the most self-deprecating people I know. So it's but in a funny way.
That's yeah. But that's me, right? Like for what I do get as well, like in addition to like people startups asking for opinions on data stuff or AI stuff. Like I do get a fair amount of people asking for, like content strategies and all the thing, and then they're always kind of disappointed when I tell them like I basically don't have one. Like it's just whatever comes up and whatever I enjoy doing, and that's the only advice, right? Sort of like do whatever comes naturally. Like you guys wrote a book, you're doing like the podcast, like you don't do the things unless you truly enjoy them, because everything takes forever, takes time, takes effort. With the exception of Twitter, actually, which in my case takes zero effort. Which is and then you get into like all the jokes, right? Like I tweet my annual landscape, which took Aman and I, like I said, like months and months of effort, and you get whatever, like 300 likes, 500 likes, 600 likes, and then like I tweet like random shit that like I didn't know I was gonna tweet like 40 seconds before I did, and that gets like 10,000 likes, right? Like it's the beauty and the frustration of the things, and like I said, I do it for entertainment and happens to resonate and create some interesting conversations, so it's all good.
That's awesome. And closing out, speaking of things that have come back, Data Driven NYC.
Yeah,
it's awesome.
So if people are in New York on from time to time, or either they obviously live here or they in town from time to time, they can find us on Eventbrite. We used to be on meetup.com, but like we're now on Eventbrite, and the event runs monthly. The next one is on April 30th, and you guys spoke at it, and you were a hit at the event. So that's one thing, and then. Because I'm a VC, I have to have a podcast. Those are the rules, and so I have a podcast called the Mad Podcast.
It's good.
Machine learning, AI, and data, which is largely something that we're still in the early stages of working on it. It's been around for 9 months now or something, but we try to have good guests and good conversations, and so people can find us on YouTube, on Spotify, on Apple. Apple Podcasts is it's the Mad Podcast with Matt Turck, like another self-aggrandizing kind of thing. But everybody hits subscribe or whatever.
Smash
whatever
the like
you're
button.
Supposed to say as an influencer, like hit the smash button or give it a like, or check it out.
Check it out. So thanks, Matt. Thanks for the fun chat. I'll have to stop by Data Driven NYC. I know Matt Housley lives there, so you can stop by a lot more easily. And are you planning on another Mad landscape for 2025?
I'm in this delusional phase after we push out those things every year, where like I said, like never again. But we'll probably do it for all the reasons mentioned at the beginning of the conversation. Right? It's a good workout. It's sort of like when you exit the gym and like you're super exhausted by a workout that was a little too brutal. You don't want to do it immediately afterwards, but then you forget and you do it again.
For sure. Did that this morning, so it's awesome, man.
Nice.
Cool.
I know you're a kettlebell person.
Yeah, I like kettlebells. Yeah, so you are too. Well, cool. Thanks, Matt. Thanks for being on the show. Congrats on another year of an awesome landscape. I can't wait to see the next one with 5,000 logos on it. It'll be awesome. I think you should guys get a special like decoder magnifying glass like they had in cereal boxes back in the day. So.
Sponsored by a LensCrafter.
Yes.
Warby Parker.
Yeah. And the Hubble Space Telescope. James Webb Space Telescope.
All right. Take care. See you guys.
All right. Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
See you anytime.
Thanks for joining.